Hello everyone, and welcome to Yoshi 1 Kenobi's Archetype Analysis, featuring Elves. Since we have the full spoilers of Kaldheim, but we don't have the set yet live on Magic Arena, I thought it'd be a good idea to look at all the Elves card that we have, and how we would go about building a good standard deck for MTG Arena with those Elves. So, where do we begin? Well, first off, we want to look at payoffs. So we want to find reasons why elves would be good, and why should we play many elves? How many should we play? So let's look at the two most powerful payoffs that we're getting from Kaldheim. We're getting Elvish Warmaster. It's a 2/2 for 2, Elf Warrior, and whenever another elf enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 elf token, and this triggers at most once per turn. And you can also pay 7 mana to give all your elves +2/+2 and Death Touch until end of turn. So the Elvish Warmaster helps you to flood the board with elf tokens, which is very strong as we've seen with like Hero of Precinct 1. It's a powerful effect, and it encourages you to play elves. And then the elf tokens, the Warmaster, and the elves you've played will finish the job by paying 7 mana and give +2/+2, which allows you to end the game. So it gives you a way to set up your board position and a good way to end the game. Then we also have Herald Unites the Elves. Now this is a 4 mana saga, and the first effect is mill 3 cards, put an elf or Tavar from your graveyard onto the battlefield. So you're not wasting any time. 4 mana, you're getting value right off the bat. Either reviving a 3-drop elf, a Warmaster, or a Tavar Planeswalker, and you're pretty much getting the value back for the card. Very strong first chapter. Second chapter, put a +1/+1 counter on each elf you control. And that's where the payoff comes in. It pays you off to play elves because you have targets for chapter 1, and chapter 2 allows you to boost your army of elves. And finally, chapter 3. Whenever an elf you control attacks this turn, target creature an opponent controls get -1/-1 until end of turn. Which means that if you have many elves and they attack, you get to kill a bunch of opponent's creatures, which is again very powerful. 3 strong chapters, 3 strong payoffs for playing elves. Next we have powerful synergy elves. So these are also very powerful cards that go with the elf tribal strategy and synergize with these elves. So we have Herald, King of Skemfar, which is a 3/2 menace for 3. And whenever it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you may reveal an elf or Tavar card and put it into your hand. So it allows you to filter and find that elf or Tavar card that you're missing at that moment, while also providing an elf body with reasonable stats on the battlefield. So fairly powerful when you have enough elves to almost guarantee a hit every time. Then we're playing the Planeswalker, Tribal for Elves, Tavarkel. At 4 mana, it gives all your elves, it turns all your elves into mana dorks that produce black mana. For a 0, you can produce a green elf token, which you'll then be able to tap for black mana on the next turn, or you get to put a +1/+1 counter for his +1 ability, untap it, gains Death Touch, which allows you to pass through that Lovestruck Beast that's been blocking you. And then the ultimate ability is an almost win the game if you're playing a critical mass of elves. Whenever you cast an elf, it gains haste and you draw 2 cards. If you get to that, you should win the game. And finally we have Skemfar Avenger, which is a 3/1 elf for 2. And whenever another elf you control dies, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. It allows you to get some value out of training your non-token elves. And that type of effect is typically fairly good, especially on the 2-drop. In terms of other synergies, I'm including some of the Shapeshifter synergies. So we have Realm Walker, which has Changeling, so it's also an elf. And you may look at the top card of your library and you may cast spells from the top of your library. So you get to cast elves from the top of your library. I think this is a slightly weaker synergy with the deck, but it might be a good idea to play around with a couple of Realm Walkers and see how they fare. It's probably good against matchups where the opponent can't remove your creatures too well, and will lead to board stalls, so you can use Realmwalker as a card advantage generation engine. Maskwood Nexus will turn all your creatures into elves, and you can pay 3 mana to summon a 2/2 blue elf on the battlefield. I don't think this is the deck for Maskwood Nexus, but still something that you can play around if you want more elf synergies. The next thing we look at are just good elves. Maybe cards that don't synergize with elves in general, but we need a critical mass for our payoffs and synergy cards to actually work. So we have Skemfar Elderhall. Chills the elf land. So it enters tapped, so we don't want to play too many of those. Taps for green, and you can pay 5 mana and sack the Skemfar Elderhall to give a creature -2/-2 and create 2/2 elf warriors. So this is a late game value play that allows you to hit more elves before you use your payoff abilities to end your opponent. It's a fairly good inclusion, fairly free, if you manage to keep the colors to 2 colors and can afford a couple of tap lands. Then we'll play Llanowar Visionary, which is a 2/2 for 3 draw card, and it's a mana dork. It's been good enough for standard in the past, especially with recursion ability, and so it's just a good elf that you can include in your 3-drop spot. Then we have Wildwood Tracker. It's basically a 2/2 for 1 mana that's an elf. So if you want to go the aggressive route, and a lot of our payoff cards go well with having 1-drops in your deck, so Wildwood Tracker actually fits well in the strategy. Then we have Masked Vandal, which is a changeling, but that means it's an elf. And it allows you to exile and target enchantment or artifact. Very powerful card. So it's a 1/3 creature that goes with our synergy. Good removal ability, very versatile. I think it's an auto-include for elves. Then we have other good elves, but elves that are, well, situational. So Radha, Heart of Gale, very powerful, allows you to play lands from the top of your deck, has a large power-up ability. Problem is that all of our good payoff elves are in green-black, and so it requires us to include that 3rd color, which I'm not sure is worth it for Radha, but it's something to look at. And then we have Oakim Adversary, which is probably more a sideboard card. It's a 2/3 Death Touch elf that will draw a card whenever it deals combat damage to a player, but you really want to have the discount. So if your opponent is playing green, bring in the Oakim Adversaries. Otherwise, well, leave it in the sideboard. And then we have Sculptor of Winter, which is a mana dork 2/2 elf for 2, but requires you to play snowlands. So if you're willing to make the jump and change your basics to snowlands, Sculptor of Winter is a decent inclusion. Then we move on to the other elves. The elves that aren't quite as good as the previous ones mentioned, or that have some restrictions. But it's still worth noting them, so that we have them in our mental database when we're deck building. So there's a Yara, First of Lochwain, which is a 2/3. You may sacrifice another black creature to draw a card. Whenever a black creature enters the battlefield, each opponent loses life and you gain a life. It's a good card, but the triple black is a little bit hard, especially since our primary color is green. So it's likely to get excluded, but still something to look at. And we have Wildborn Preserver, a 2/2 flash reach for 2. And you get to boost it whenever you play another elf, and you may pay X to boost the Wildborn Preserver. And when all of your elves are mana dorks, thanks to Tivar, that has the potential to become fairly big. So if you wanted a couple of Wildborn Preservers in your 2-drops, I would not blame you. There's also Tajuju Paragon, which is an elf, as well as a rogue, cleric, warrior, and wizard. But it has the kicker ability. So it's a 3/2 for 2. But it's also a 3/2 for 5 that allows you to look at top 6 cards and put an elf from it into your hand. So it's kind of a weaker version of Tivar that we had mentioned earlier. Then we have Canopy Tactician and Elven Ambush that are standard legal, but come from the structure decks. So Canopy Tactician is a 3/3 for 4, and it's a lord, so it gives all your other elves +1/+1, and you can tap it to add 3 green mana. The effects are fairly good, but 4 mana is expensive, and our 4-drop is already fairly cluttered, so I don't think it's going to see much play. Still worth noting, though. An Elven Ambush, that'll create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature for every elf you control. So if you have a large board in a stalled situation, you Elven Ambush and suddenly you have a whole lot more elves. And there's also Elderfan Ritualist, a 3/1 for 3, and whenever it dies, return an elf from your graveyard to your hand for some value. Again, I don't think that these cards will see much play, but they're borderline playable, and they're all elf tribal nice cards. Elven Ambush might actually be a decent sideboard card, again, when you're expecting the board to get flooded with creatures, and you need a way to push through and actually win the game. And now is the time where I want to remind you that even though you're playing Elf Tribal, doesn't mean that you have to play only Elf or Elf supporting cards. Depending on the payoffs, and some of our payoffs look at the top 5 cards and trigger whenever you play an elf card. So you want to play a critical mass of elves, but you're allowed to play non-elf cards, and you should be playing the very best cards in the colors that you're playing. And even if they're not elves, play them in your deck. They will win you games. Which brings us to a sample deck list. So I have here what I consider the core of my Elves deck. 4 Wildwood Trackers, because Elvish War Master, Skemfar Avenger, all care about having cheap elves. Well, it allows you to trigger War Master easily. Skemfar Avenger will draw you the card when Wildwood Tracker goes down. Also, you want a 1-drop for Agadeem's Awakening, which I'm including in the lands. For War Master, it's probably the best elf card. For Skemfar Avengers, because it's a very solid 2-drop. That's an elf. 2 Masked Vandals, because they're flexible, but you probably want some of those in the sideboard and some of those in the main board, because it's that powerful, but it's also situational. For Herald, King of Skemfar, very powerful, replaces itself, so why not play 4? Because it's legendary, you can consider playing 3, also not another option. For Lattimore Visionary, replaces itself, probably one of the other best 3-drop elves that we have. And then Herald Unites the Elves, I would never consider playing less than 4. Herald Unites the Elf, Elvish War Master are 2 key payoffs for the deck. And as for Devarkel, it's a good card, but I don't think it deserves a 4 of, because it's Legendary Planeswalker. I'd consider playing 2 or 3. I'm going to start playing around with 2, especially since we can fetch it with Herald, King of Skemfar, and we already have kind of our core so far, and we'll get to revive it where Herald Unites the Elves if we want to, and we really want to flood the board. And that leaves us with 6 flex spots if we're playing 26 lands. One thing that I haven't mentioned is Crippling Fear, which will give -3/-3 to everything that is not one fixed creature type. So you call elves, and all of your creatures are immune to the mass removal spell, and all of your opponent's creatures are getting -3/-3, which also supports our tribal synergy by being kind of a one-sided board wipe against your opponent. Unless your opponent's also playing elves, in which case you should sideboard this immediately. We'll play 2 Heartless Act, because we want to have a little bit of extra removal. Herald Unites the Elves will act as part of removal on Chapter 3, but we're talking turn 4 Herald, the 3rd chapter, so we need a little bit of earlier removal, and I think 2 Heartless Acts is probably good enough. And I'd play 2 Snakeskin Veil, because Elvish War Master is one of our best payoffs, but it dies to everything. Shock, Bone Crusher Giant, Blood Chief's Thirst, so you'll want to protect it. And having these 2 Snakeskin's Veil and the 4 Herald Unites the Elf to keep on reviving it and just saying, Elvish War Master, Elvish War Master, Elvish War Master, one's gonna stick. And you can also fetch the other ones with Herald, King of Skemfar, And once you get one to stick, you flood the board, you win the game, and that's how it's done. In terms of lands, for Archetype's Awakening, because we have a lot of nice enter the battlefield abilities, we have a low to the ground curve. So 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, either of those, both great enter the battlefield ability. So if you Archetype's Awakening, a Tracker, a War Master, and a Visionary, you draw a card, you summon a 1/1 elf, you get the 2/2, you get the 2/2, so you get 4 creatures, you draw a card. And that's a 6 mana on Archetype's Awakening. It's just very good. Then we'll play 2 Skemfall Elder Hall. We don't want to play too many tap lands, but it's good, and you get to play it as a land and sack it later in the game when you need more action. We'll play the Darkboard Pathways, which we're getting because, well, it's 2 colors, it's great. 4 Fabled Passages, 7 Forests, 5 Swamps. We can consider playing some Castle Lockveins. You can consider playing a couple of Temples if you like scrying, maybe instead of Fabled Passages. You can consider a 3rd Skemfall Elder Hall, and you can consider, well, maybe Kazandu Mammoth, just because it's very good. It's one of these, it's a very good card, so you should consider playing them. But it goes into the tap land area with Skemfall Elder Hall, so you might want to play a couple, tinker a little bit around with it, and maybe Turntimber's Symbiosis is worth it, but our creatures are all fairly weak. So I'm not sure if it's worth investing into the Symbiosis. Maybe a pair of Symbiosis instead of 2 Forests would be worth it. But this list will require some tinkering, but it's a good starting point if you're wanting to play Elves in Kaldheim Standard, as it's gonna hit Magic Arena this week. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe. It won't cost you any mana, and it greatly helps to support this channel and keep the awesome videos coming. Until next time, may the fun be with you.